Hello and welcome back to another episode of Armchair Analysts, the only podcast that thinks Big Sam should have a statue outside Wembley. My name's Cameron McDonald, and I've spent 3 years working as an FA licensed intermediary here in the UK. My co-host Rupert Meadows has written and broadcasted about all things football on platforms such as TalkSport Radio and TV Sport. But above all else, we're fans.
Yeah, thanks for that, Cam. A huge development in the European football scene has been reported this week with a reformatting of the Champions League, changing the way the qualification and progression works for the top teams, whilst massively threatening the livelihood and futures of smaller sides. Football as we know it really could be flipped on its head by this, so make sure to stay tuned, and as always, timestamps are in the description. Starting off this week, though, is the news that Sergio Aguero is set to leave Manchester City at the end of the season.
Yeah, this has been a really huge bit of news to come out, and again, maybe a seemingly odd time to do it, but they said they brought forward the contract decision to now so that he would have time to decide his future. And it definitely gives rise to two really interesting questions. One of which is, where is he going to go? The second of which being, who's going to come in to replace him? So I thought it'd be interesting to sort of bounce that off you and sort of discuss which of these two answers we can land on. I think first would be really interesting to sort of look at where he might go. He is still a top quality striker when he's fit, and injury is definitely something to take into account when you're looking at where he might go. But ultimately, he's a player who's going to be out of contract, so a free pickup, all you have to do is cover his wages. So I think a lot of big teams are definitely going to be interested. The first team that I think will be maybe thinking about bringing Sergio Aguero in is Barcelona. I think Barcelona are really interested in keeping Messi happy. Obviously, we talked about the presidential elections a couple of weeks ago, and Juan Laporta won. One of his platforms was building the club around Messi, keeping Messi happy. I think Tony Frazier had a slightly different platform, but Laporta definitely is pro-Messi, and Messi and Aguero are really close mates. I think they're like best mates. They always room together when they're on international duty. And have often spoken together about their desire to play for the same club. So if you're Laporta and you're worried about Messi staying or leaving, maybe bringing in Aguero would be the best way to keep Lionel Messi happy. On top of that, as we just mentioned, Aguero is going to be free, and that lack of transfer fee would really work well with the way that Barcelona's finances are going at the moment. They can't really afford to spend 120 million on bringing in someone like an Erling Haaland, but they do still need a top quality finisher after letting Luis Suarez go. Might seem that Aguero fills that role perfectly.
Yeah, definitely. It's a very generous way of putting it, Cam. With the way the Barcelona's finances, it might be quite good for them. They're broken, he's free. They need the scrap. It definitely seems like the obvious no-brainer option in the pile, not just because it would keep Messi happy, but for Aguero settling in a new place and someone who's frequently injured, it would also keep him happy to have his best mate around the corner. And their families are friends. I'm sure he knows the city of Barcelona really well as a result. He's lived in Spain before. I see that as like definitely the most obvious option. The only thing that could counter that is if Messi wants to go the other way to Man City. But yeah, I think that I really see there are kind of three different types of team that could get Messi after this. One is Barcelona as like the abroad.
Aguero even.
Sorry, they could get Aguero. One is Barcelona, which is the abroad option, but still very much challenging in Europe. The other is still a domestic team. Someone like a Chelsea or a Manchester United that are both linked with him would both love to pick him up, and I think he'd be really good, not only as kind of a second choice striker. It's hard to make him first choice when he's injured so often, but one that can be in the dressing room and influence the players, and also help the young strikers coming through. I'm sure Aguero would do wonders for Mason Greenwood and Marcus Rashford, as he would for Timo Werner and Tammy Abraham. And then I think kind of the third option would maybe be somewhere far away, somewhere like the MLS or somewhere that's a little quieter where he can enjoy his final few years.
Or back to South America even.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, no, I agree, and I think I don't see him going to Manchester United, if only because I think he's already come out and expressed that he would never play for Real Madrid based on the fact that he started off with Atletico Madrid in Europe, and so following that logic, and given the fact that he's even more of a legend at Manchester City than he was at Atletico Madrid, they're building a statue of him outside the Etihad.
Yeah,
I think the logic would track that he wouldn't go to Manchester United.
I mean, it would surely be the first time in history that if he did go back to playing in a derby against a side that is currently erecting a statue in your honour, that would surely be a first.
Yeah, absolutely. They'd probably tear it down.
True. Well, yeah. Okay, so maybe Man U's off the table. I could see him being bought by Chelsea. They've said they're interested. I actually think he'd be a pretty good signing for them. And yeah, or Barcelona. I think that's probably the most likely. And I think, as you said, Messi would jump at the chance. It ticks pretty much all of the boxes, apart from maybe I wouldn't say he's a like-for-like replacement because I think you can still rely on Luis Suarez to score, as we're seeing this year, 20 goals in the league plus.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas Aguero, just by nature of the fact that he's probably only going to play 10, 15 games in a realistic season at the moment,
concern.
He might well not hit double figures, let alone 20.
Yeah, and I think the other thing with Barcelona, the only other thing to consider is that yes, he would help them keep Messi and he would help that whole thing go on. But one of the big problems that Barcelona has been facing as an organisation at the moment is sort of an inability to move on to pastures new, and bringing in a 32-year-old striker who is frequently injured might not be the best way to sort of turn the page and start a new chapter.
True. I mean, I think it's tricky because you can't. It definitely feels like having your cake and eating it, which is moving on to pastures new, but keeping Messi happy at all costs. I feel like
it's a difficult balancing act.
Maybe the alternative would be to try and sign some sort of younger Argentinian star. Incidentally, I'm going to be speaking about a younger Argentinian star later as someone that I think should replace Sergio Aguero. But yeah, it's going to be interesting, and I think it's always nice when you see a club that's releasing a legend just treat him with total respect and say, like, go where you want. We're letting you be made available at this point so that you can work out where it is, and yeah, just go in peace. So props to City for that.
There's one other area that I think we haven't really discussed. You mentioned, obviously, the MLS or South America. We talked about Barcelona being a very realistic candidate, possibly Atletico Madrid as well, although I don't necessarily think he's so much of a Simeone player, but I digress. And you also talked about sort of the Chelseas and the Man Uniteds. I think there's one other potentially very obvious candidate for a striker who's getting up there a little bit and is maybe looking for a sort of second lease of life in his sort of 30s career, and that's Serie A. Italy has always really been known for its ability to work with older players. Ronaldo moved to Juventus, of course, and he said that, it was Patrice Evra who came to him and went, listen, if you want to play at the next Euros and at the next World Cup, you need to go to Italy because they know how to just really work on players' longevity. Ibrahimovic is 39 and he's still scoring for fun there. You've got players like Luca Toni and Alessandro Del Piero that play deep into their 30s, and I think Del Piero might be, no, I think it was 39 when he finished. But that would make sense. I think there's already been rumours of Inter Milan maybe looking at him, maybe either to sell Lukaku and bring him in as a replacement or to have them partner. But I actually think that there is one Italian club with a really rich history of Argentinian goal scorers that might want to take a look at him in Napoli.
Napoli, yeah. I thought you were going to say Napoli.
Of course, they've had Higuain, they've had Lavezzi, and of course the big man himself, Diego Maradona. So I could definitely see them, they've definitely slipped down a little bit this season in the Serie A. They're not quite challenging. Both Milan clubs have come up and restored themselves a little bit, and Juventus are, of course, in the mix as always. Napoli might look at Aguero as a player that could sort of get them back in the mix, because a couple of years ago they were the second best team in Italy, and now they're maybe the fifth. Yeah,
true. I mean, it's an interesting one just because as well they have kind of a precedent of playing in that kind of tactical style. They currently have players like Lorenzo Insigne on the books, who is 29 at the moment. He, has a similar tactical profile to Aguero and has played up front for Napoli this season and in previous seasons. So yeah, I could definitely see it happening. I think Serie A is a good option to include. You're right.
It just makes sense in terms of aging players. Could be Inter, could be even someone like Roma, but Napoli just seems to be the one that seems most likely if he's going to go to a Serie A club.
Yeah, because he's got no real connection to Juventus apart from maybe like if he's mates with Paulo Dybala. I can't really see him at either Milan. I mean, I would not know why Inter Milan would want to get rid of Lukaku and get Aguero instead, just because of the whole injury stuff that we talked about. You can't rely on him to lead a line. He's a legend that needs to be kind of taken care of rather than expected to deliver week in, week out. So yeah, Napoli is the obvious one.
Just sort of a sporting thing. The last team that I had in mind, and this is the one that I would say of all the ones I've thought about that is probably the least likely, so the most likely to not happen, and that's Borussia Dortmund. I think that Aguero's movement is going to be potentially linked in part to who City bring in to replace him. You already mentioned that his sort of move to Barcelona will be very dependent on whether Messi goes the other way himself, and I think maybe if Erling Haaland goes over to Manchester City, Dortmund might be looking for a cheap striker to pick up. They have got a lot of young players coming through. Obviously, Youssoufa Moukoko is their current sort of wonder kid that they're blooding. He's played about 12 games this season, but he's 16 years old. Aguero could potentially be the perfect player to come in, be a bit of a mentor, fill in the game so that Moukoko doesn't have to come in and fill Haaland's shoes straight away, and sort of just ease him in, and sort of so that we get a situation where as Aguero's easing up, Moukoko is settling into the role.
Yeah, it's a nice idea. I mean, I definitely like the idea of him going to a club like Dortmund or like Napoli where he gets a new adventure and he shows that he is still a world-class striker, which he absolutely is. But I do worry that maybe he does need a little bit more protecting and whether or not he wouldn't get that somewhere like Barcelona. I mean, I think my ideal scenario would be one in which he and Messi both joined the same new club. And, you know...
and it's all at Barnet.
I mean, I was thinking Port Vale, but yes.
That would be just luxury football right there.
I mean, watch them get broken in minute 10. But yeah, I mean, to watch them both even go back to Argentina would be a joy. Because for the first time, I'd actually go out and try and watch those league matches.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think definitely if you had two players of that caliber go back to... even if it was the MLS or back to Argentina, it'd be really interesting. You'd definitely get a lot more people watching. I suppose the only question is, are they both going to, at this moment in time, take the massive wage cut that you would need to take to go back to Argentina, when it still is the case that there are definitely going to be big clubs, like, for example, Chelsea, like, for example, Barcelona, looking at Aguero. Is he going to... I mean, his family does live in Argentina, so he might take the pay cut to move back there, but at the same time, he could very easily, delay that for 2 years, play at a Chelsea or someone like that, pick up another few £1 million, and then go back to Argentina.
True, and yeah, as you said, there's no reason why they couldn't do that in a couple of years' time. And that would make sense because despite the fact that it is, like, obviously the dream for me at least, it won't happen just because Aguero is probably going to choose his club in the next couple of months and Messi isn't out of contract yet. So he wouldn't be able to be in the same position until closer to the summer. And yeah, I just can't really see it happening, but that doesn't mean I can't imagine it.
A boy can dream. The other thing that's interesting, obviously, with Aguero leaving, it means that City's only real striker is Gabriel Jesus. He came out and said, Aguero's a legend. I can't wait to fill his shoes. And I think everyone in the football community was like, oh man, you don't even know what's coming.
It's kind of one of those, it's like, who's going to tell him? I don't want to do it. Can you do it?
He's like, man, I'm finally going to be City's first choice striker. And I was like, oh boy. So I'm going to tell him that his puppy didn't actually go to a farm.
Yeah, I mean, I think that all of the names listed have gone from the sublime to the ridiculous. And let's start with Erling Haaland, I think, just because you mentioned him earlier, and we might have different opinions on whether or not he'd be a good fit.
I think that Erling Haaland's a good place to start because, like how we started with Barcelona, I think that he's the obvious front runner. I think that, he is Europe's hottest prospect at the moment. He's also going to be playing against City in the Champions League quarterfinals in a couple of weeks, which is, basically going to be him, or not even a couple of weeks, a week. So he's basically going to be auditioning himself to City. If he knocks them out of the Champions League quarterfinals, you might as well just start mocking up the graphics of him in a City shirt there and then. And even if they go out, it's such a City signing to go after the hottest prospect and to try and get him. I do also think, something else we talked about last week is he does have links to the club. His father played there. They might have a familial grudge against Manchester United and Roy Keane in particular. So that might, incentivize him to move to Manchester City. And on top of all of that, City are one of a handful of clubs that can afford to buy him. He has got this release clause, but it's apparently only active next summer. But even that release clause is allegedly 75 million euros. Some sources, like Jan Alger Fortfus, has even reported it as higher. So it's going to be in the triple figures, and City are one of a few clubs in this current financial climate that can afford to shell that out.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, firstly, let's just get one thing clear. I think 75 million for Haaland in another year and a half's time. So many clubs would go for that. Any top top 3 or 4 club in the top 5 leagues would want that signing. So I
that's
don't
a
think
steal.
that's a concern. I think tactically he'd be a terrible option. And I maybe have a slight question of whether or not he is the typical City signing. I think generally in my mind, City tend to go for players that have a lot of upside, a lot of potential, but are maybe like a couple of rungs below the likes of someone like a Haaland or an Mbappe. Um, I think that the main problem that I see with Haaland is that he only has eyes for goal. And it's something that you see every time you watch him play, even if it's just highlights and not full games. He only cares about scoring goals. And that is not a person that would fit into Pep Guardiola's system, at least naturally. I mean, if you look at the tactical profile of someone like Sergio Aguero, for example, he's really versatile, good with both feet, can score from close range of distance like Haaland, but he's got incredible movement. He drifts wide. He often operates between the fullback and centre back to create space for the wingers. He drops deep to pull centre backs out of position. I just feel like the role, at least if Pep Guardiola wants to, replace him like for like, or with someone that he doesn't have to change the system for, Haaland is not a good option. He's like the ultimate number 9, and what City want is a 9.5.
Yeah, I totally agree. I don't think he's a Pep player at all. I think that you're completely right in that City don't operate with a traditional number 9, and Haaland is sort of the what a dictionary definition of a total number 9. I do think that sometimes that won't necessarily stop City because they do make signings that sometimes don't work so well. We talked about it last week about how they sort of just have the shopping cart and the arm just going down the supermarket shelves. And just to clarify what I meant in terms of he's a City kind of signing, we look at someone like Haaland as a very sort of well-established superstar, but realistically, he's only been hitting the real highlights of the media. Obviously, he had a great season at Salzburg and then Leipzig, but it's also at Salzburg even and then Dortmund. But it's only really been this season that he's been talked about as being world class. He reminds me a lot in terms of how his media profile, not playing profile, to Kevin De Bruyne and how he just burst out into the scene in Wolfsburg, was the hottest, most exciting midfield talent, and then City snapped him up, or even Aguero when they got him from Atletico Madrid. So in that sense, I think he is a City signing, but I do agree absolutely he's not really a Pep player. I do wonder if, that is something that will necessarily get in the way, though, or if Pep will look at them and go, well, maybe we'll just make a change for this player, build it around him, or even do something like when, Chelsea signed Kai Havertz, and it's, well, do we need this player? Well, I mean, he is available. We're in a perfect position to sign him. We don't want to let this opportunity pass us by.
Yeah, I think the only things I would say to that is, one, Pep Guardiola, as we've discussed before, has a lot more control over City's signings than any Chelsea manager will do in the past or in the near future. I think that for the money that he would go for, which is about 150 million, surely, that's a new type of signing that City would make. I think De Bruyne for 60 million is the most they've spent on a player. So
Ruben Diaz now, I think.
Ruben Diaz. So
this summer, but still,
to be fair, they are continually spending more on bigger and bigger players, but I do think that Haaland would be a step up. And I think the reason why I'm opposed to it is just because the other player that would go for stupid money as well is also just so much better suited to the system, which is Kylian Mbappe.
Yeah, let's talk about him.
I mean, if you want to talk about someone who is, tactically really intelligent, he's got great physicality, he's two-footed again, but the main thing is he's got great spatial awareness, he's incredible at making blindside runs, at drawing defences out of positions and things like that, and I think he's just a match made in heaven for Pep Guardiola. I think he's a pipe dream still, but he's absolutely the perfect player for Pep's system.
Yeah, again, I agree, but I have sort of, I think with both Haaland and Mbappe, I think how well they fit City's system is kind of inverse to how likely I think the move is to happen in a weird sense. And I think there's 3 reasons to my mind, 3 big reasons that Mbappe to City just won't happen. Obviously, first and foremost is that PSG are every bit as moneyed and successful as Manchester City are right now. Obviously, you could make the argument that moving from Ligue 1 to the Premier League is a move up, but Kylian Mbappe is French, so maybe he won't feel that way. Maybe it's a moot point. But they're one of the only clubs in world football that City can't really entice players away from with either the promise of higher wages or with the promise of more silverware, because PSG are on the same level as Man City in that respect. I always think that my other thing is that Mbappe has always openly stated his love of Real Madrid. And I think that if he's thinking about his next big career move, it's probably going to be for a 3, 4, 5 year move at least. And he might be looking at Real Madrid now in turmoil and thinking, not only could I move to Real Madrid and have my dream move, but I could be the player that brings them back to the top. I could be a Real Madrid legend off the rip. So I think he might be waiting for that moment. And thirdly, although I do think that he would fit City's system really well, I do think it would take a little bit of tweaking on both his end and the club's end. I think that if they go for him and another striker, which I don't think is outside of the scope of reality at all, it's going to work a lot better. But if you think about Mbappe and the way that he operates, even though we just talked about how Manchester City don't operate with a straight number 9, Kylian Mbappe's career has really been defined by the fact that he does. When he was coming through at Monaco, he was playing off of Falcao in that breakout season. Obviously for France, he's been playing off of Giroud. For PSG, he's been playing off either Cavani when he was there or Mauro Icardi this season and Moise Kean at times. So I think that his best role has been not so much as an out-and-out striker, but as like a winger/second striker, which perhaps City could reformat into a way of making him their main goal scorer while also sort of retaining that position. But I do think it would take a little bit of effort from both sides. Incidentally, I think he's so good that he would be able to do that pretty quickly, but I think it would be a slight departure from the way he's played his football up to now.
That's true. I think that you're absolutely right. The reason why I think that it would work, to adapt a second striker is just because the fact that Pep Guardiola has tried to do it a couple of times already with players like Raheem Sterling and Ferran Torres shows that I think a second striker's skill set is actually really well suited to that position. But I do take your comment that of course it would be a departure for Mbappe even if it wasn't for City.
Mm-hmm. Well, it wouldn't necessarily be in City in terms of what they want to play, definitely, but they just haven't had a player with Mbappe's skill set do that. They've tried to make it work with Sterling and with Ferran Torres, as you mentioned, and even De Bruyne on occasion. So it might be the case that he's finally the puzzle piece that fits in perfectly from City's end. But I do think that he'll have to maybe think about how he changes his game slightly, not playing off someone like a sort of traditional target man.
Yeah, sure thing. I mean, so the other two options that have been broadly mentioned, Harry Kane, I don't see this happening.
You don't see Harry Kane happening at all?
I think he doesn't fit the system, and for Tottenham to allow him to go to a domestic rival, I think he'd go for a lot of money.
Yeah, I think he would go for a lot of money. There are a few reasons, again, and this is partly just because I think sometimes you have players who you sign for purely tactical reasons, and sometimes, most notably with Real Madrid's Galacticos project, you have players who are signed for branding reasons. And I think, firstly, Harry Kane is English, which is really important just in terms of a quota reason. Man City have always signed English players, sometimes very dubious players like Fabian Delph and Scott Sinclair to sort of help their representation. But I also think that the fact that he's English makes him really marketable to the English football fan. I think, we'll talk about Lionel Messi in a second and what he represents, but Harry Kane being the England captain could be so massive for Manchester City as a brand. When I think about Chelsea, for example, and how Chelsea sort of started this current iteration of themselves as a club in 2004 and are now undoubtedly in the top 10 biggest clubs in the world, I really think that a big part of that has to do not only with the domestic success, but the fact that it was domestic success off the back of English players. And I think so many children in the UK grew up looking at John Terry and looking at Frank Lampard sort of play for England, be these massive English heroes and go, oh, I love Lampard, and then subsequently, and I love Chelsea. And so many people growing up these days, I don't know the exact percentage, but so many people growing up are Chelsea fans today, and that's just only helped their brand. I think in much the same way, bringing in someone like Harry Kane, especially because we've got the Euros this summer, especially because the World Cup is next year as well, if England have a great performance and England captain Harry Kane is playing for Manchester City, you're inevitably going to see a huge new generation of Manchester City fans come out. And I think that that's something that, from an organisational level, something that goes beyond even Pep's views for the club, but people like Sheikh Mansour and the people operating it, that's something they really want to go for.
It's a really good point, and I also think, he's got a great connection with Raheem Sterling. They've got Phil Foden coming through, who is touted by a lot of people as one of the future stars of England. And, I really could see it fitting in that remit. You're absolutely right. And I think, after that, I feel like the next potential signing would be to try and get someone like Jadon Sancho. And at that point, with a front three of Sterling, Kane and Sancho with Foden in behind, like you do have the next core of the England team for 5 years to come. So yeah, I see the perspective, and it's definitely an opportunity in those terms for sure.
I do also think, these other players we've discussed, Haaland and Mbappe, I think they're both such good players, and Messi as well, you can add to this list, that they would fit in that system anyway. But we know that the Premier League is such a question mark for some players who come over, and there is always that little potential that, this player will come over and they'll have their Andrew Shevchenko moment and not work out as well in the Premier League. Whereas with Harry Kane, unlike any of these other players, he's a 2-time Golden Boot winner. He's proven that he can score, at a great rate in the Premier League.
True, yeah, and he also is hungry for titles. Like he wants to win things.
Well, exactly. He's come out this season, and usually his rhetoric is always like, "Oh, I love Spurs, can't see myself playing anywhere else." And he's not said he wants to leave, but he's very much been, coming out with things like, "Oh, well, I'm under contract with this club at the moment, but we'll reevaluate at the end of the season." So,
true,
could all line up for a big.
It could happen.
Could all line up, but it would take a lot of movement. It would take a lot of funds and a lot of movement.
That's true, yeah. They'd have to really force it through. But, as you say, could happen. The other player that I want to just kind of insert into the sphere and maybe get your perspective on it is an Argentinian player currently in Serie A, playing for Inter Milan, Lautaro Martinez.
Yeah, another player that I think could definitely work in City's system. I think it's a player that could be a shrewd signing for them. It wouldn't cost them as much money as any of the other players we've mentioned on this list, but I almost feel like that works against him in terms of how City sort of maybe want to announce themselves as a large club. I mean, I know they haven't made any triple-figure signings yet to date, but I don't know, something about Lautaro Martinez at City, even though I could see it working, just I can't see it happening in my head in sort of like the reverse way to how I don't think Erling Haaland would be the best bet, but I absolutely see him pulling on a City shirt this summer.
That's interesting because so when I was trying to work out who could I see from other leagues and other clubs joining City, I was kind of looking through a lot of the top strikers and none of them really seem to fit. You got players that I think do fit the mold, like Insigne or Iago Aspas or even Dusan Tadic, who's having an incredible season in the Eredivisie, but they're all kind of, and Andrej Kramaric in the Bundesliga, they're all 29 to 32, having a great season and fit the profile, but realistically they're too old to replace Aguero. Then you've got a lot of younger players like Patson Daka, Gerard Moreno, who are having incredible seasons but are really, beginning their careers. They're 22.
Yeah, untested.
And I would put Haaland. I don't think he's worth the money, would be my main. But I do put him in that same category as the other two youngsters, as just being an incredible prospect. But I do think Lautaro Martinez, he's young enough to be a replacement for years to come. He's 23. He's got 14 goals and 15 assists in 21 games. He's got a similar playing style to Aguero. Maybe it's just also because he's Argentinian that I could see kind of a like-for-like replacement. But, I mean, I personally think that it could happen and I could see it. But, yeah, I hear what you're saying.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's sort of a weird line that I'm holding for all of these players because I'm almost sort of arguing for a very bizarre transfer strategy from Manchester City. But I think conceptually, yeah, he would work really well as a replacement and does have a lot of the similar qualities, as well as being in that age sweet spot, as you mentioned, which I think is really important. I think the final player that we would look at is a player that, again, doesn't really make sense in terms of age necessarily, but in terms of branding is another huge obvious person that would elevate Manchester City's brand, and that's Lionel Messi. Obviously his contract is up in the summer, and again City are only one of the few clubs in Europe that could afford his wages. He would be potentially coming in on a free. You've got the Pep Guardiola and Messi connection, particularly if City don't win the Champions League this year. You'd have to think that there's going to be a little thought in Pep's head going, well, last time I won it I had this guy, could happen again. And when you bring Messi in, not only are you going to make a load of money back on the shirt sales, naturally, but I also think that, as we talked about with Harry Kane, I think City's biggest thing, more than winning the Champions League, more than winning the league again, those are all sort of components of their larger goal, which is to become a big club. And I think they are obviously now like one of the bigger clubs in Europe. But when I think of what a truly massive club means, I always think of the example of like, if you go into some rural village in the arse end of nowhere, is there going to be some guy on a cart selling football shirts from this team? And, I remember definitely growing up, anywhere you go in the world, between the years 2006
It's
and
Man U shirts,
2012.
as far as that I can see.
Specifically Wayne Rooney, the Eon Man United shirt. Anywhere you go, it doesn't matter where you are. I'm sure they sold them in North Korea. And I think that having Lionel Messi at Manchester City would be much the same, because those are the other ones. It was always the Messi Barcelona and the Ronaldo Real Madrid. So I could definitely see that one happening. I think maybe it wouldn't be the smartest move in the world to, make the decision to release one aging Argentine and bring in another. But, I could also see him coming in, maybe even as part of the City hierarchy, and sort of they have him in as, just a big Galactico type signing, and then he ends up working with Pep as sort of part of the hierarchy after a year or two playing.
It could be. I mean, I think obviously they've got that connection, and, there's been so much talk about whether or not Messi could ever make it in the Premier League, and of course his great rival Ronaldo did play there and make it. So I could see the appeal. I think in my mind it feels a little bit like ships passing in the night, in that I think all of the components are there for it to work. I just don't think they're ever really going to align. Like, I think for Messi to ever move to City, it would necessitate him being at least a couple of years younger, Aguero to be a big draw for him to arrive, and things like that. Whereas I think the moment's passed.
Yeah, it may well have. It may well have. And again, it's one of those that would make sense in a lot of ways, but in a lot of other ways, City would much prefer to go for a young up-and-coming prospect rather than a player who may still be at the top of his game if he gets, a lot of allegations have been said that his weaker season this year has been because of Barcelona's form in general, so he might re-find it, but he is 33, so even if he's back at the top of his game, it's not going to be for that long, whereas someone like a Haaland or an Mbappe, you're going to have for 5+ years.
Yeah, for sure. It's funny because I guess as just a fan of English football, it's exciting and terrifying in equal measure to imagine all of these great players at Man City next season. I'm definitely looking forward to seeing how, the new signing, whoever it may be, is brought in, incorporated into the system, how they approach the new season with a new look side, especially given the fact that they're set to continue dominating domestically for the rest of the season here. So yeah, it's definitely one to look forward to.
It'll definitely be an interesting addition, or additions. I think Thierry Henry was the one who, when they were discussing him and Jamie Carragher, Haaland or Mbappe, they asked him who he would sign if he was director of football at City, and I think he went, I'd sign both if I was City, so who knows?
I mean, that's a City move. We'll take the lot.
Moving into guessing game, you've got one for me this week?
I do indeed, yeah. I've got an interesting one for you this week. We're going to see how you get on. This player was the youngest ever player to make 100 appearances in the Champions League when he reached the milestone.
Okay.
He has been on the front cover of a Pro Evolution Soccer game, and he was the first ever winner of the FIFA Ballon d'Or.
Interesting.
And then his first ever contract was written on a paper napkin. And when he was coming up in youth football, his country actually organised 2 under-20 friendlies just to cement his status as a player and ward off another international side that was trying to get him involved.
Sorry, can you say that last one again?
When he was his first ever contract was written on a paper napkin. And when he was coming up in youth football, his national side actually organised 2 under-20 friendlies just to cement his status as their player.
Okay, well, I'm really going to have to think about this one. Okay, well, that was slightly stop me, but it's a good segue into our next this is not even so much a segment, but just something I wanted to bounce off you, talking about the international break. And I think for most football fans, the international breaks, and certainly the frequency of them, is just a continuing and ever-growing headache, especially in this season where we've got so many injuries, we've got such a busy schedule with things being replanned and rescheduled the whole time. Having all these international breaks is really annoying, especially when you see things like England playing San Marino, because and I mean no disrespect to either side really when I say this, I just don't see the point in those games happening. I don't know that it does anything for England. I don't know that it does anything for San Marino. I think both teams will be better served by playing teams more on their level instead of watching us, beat them 5-0 for the 80th time. And I think one solution to maybe either the San Marino problem or just the international break problem in general is something that I'd like to sort of bounce off you and see if you have, because it's not even a fully formed idea. I'd like to see a sort of international rotation built into players' contracts, because we've already seen with a lot of players, like for example Jadon Sancho, this international break, get quote unquote injured beforehand. And I also think it's the most interesting watching England at the moment, even if it is against these smaller sides, when you see a bit of variety in the 11. Like, one of the few things that's been exciting about watching England in the friendlies recently has been the introduction of Calvin Phillips to the 11. And I think the rotation is an everyone wins situation. For fans like you and I, the nothing games would be more interesting, watching James Ward-Prowse get a game and watching Jack Grealish get a game and players like this, although he should be in the first team. I think it's beneficial to the players that would play, they'd be getting a chance, and also the ones that don't play because they'd be getting a rest. I think the manager would also get benefit because they're forced to explore their options, and we wouldn't see a repeat of what often happens to England in tournaments. I'm thinking of 2014 World Cup, where the manager just doesn't know how to use their squad, and so we end up losing it earlier. And I think it's beneficial to the clubs that contract these players as well, because there's less likelihood of these players getting injured.
Okay, so what you would say is that built into their contract with the international side built into their agreement with their national side is an agreement that they won't play certain games, that they'll rotate out?
Yeah, so something along the lines of, and again, this is a very not really formed idea. I was hoping to bounce it off you, see if you had somewhere to take it, but some sort of agreement whereby outside of major tournaments, those being, the World Cup and any, Euros or Euro equivalent, like Copa America, outside of those major tournaments, maybe something saying that no player can play 2 consecutive games, that would sort of just encourage people to rotate the squad more, because I think it would just be beneficial to everyone.
So, I mean, would that also be for someone like San Marino, who would they need to field a whole new 11 as well?
I think that would also be kind of funny to really see the depth of the San Marino squad.
England B versus San Marino B.
Well, all you'd need, a squad is 25 people. All you need is 50 people able to play football. I know that San Marino are scraping the barrel, but I'm sure they could find 50 people that play football.
True, but I don't think it solves the problem of it being a one-sided game that's not really valuable to either team.
No, the San Marino one certainly, but I think that in terms of there'll be less risk of injury. You wouldn't see, if you're Spurs and Harry Kane gets injured playing against San Marino, you're absolutely fuming. You'd probably think about legal action against the FA, and it's not very interesting for us if Harry Kane or even Dominic Calvert-Lewin scores for the millionth time, like Wayne Rooney always did, scoring another 50 goals against San Marino. Whereas watching someone like Patrick Bamford play San Marino, that's actually a little bit interesting.
Yeah, no, you're right. I get what you're saying. I think, I guess I like the idea, but I don't think it solves the problem, which is, that these games are one-sided. Like, I think that's a nice idea separate from this. And I think that could be a really nice thing. I mean, personally, I feel like I said last week, I'm a big fan of Gareth Southgate rotating, and I think that even, things like friendlies, international friendlies, even if you're playing something like the Netherlands or France, like that's a nice opportunity to bring in players that aren't always, able to represent their country in competitions. So, I mean, I guess it would demand that to have some sort of rotational system. I personally would, I wouldn't be against it at all. I think with regards to this, like England versus San Marino, doesn't make sense for either side. I think something else needs to be done for that.
Yeah, it's sort of, I've come with 2 different things there. It maybe wouldn't necessarily solve the San Marino issue. That is, maybe teams should have their own tiers. But just in terms of making international friendlies and international breaks more palatable, I think the rotation idea would go a long way to making it a more palatable situation for fans, for clubs, for players, for the manager, such that I think there's... Maybe in a future episode when the idea is more fully formed, we'll have something to say about it. But I just thought good to run past you.
Yeah, I mean, I think you'd need to have some sort of like tiered system. It would maybe need to be an agreement for the top sides that have, a great depth to draw from, because I think it does, really encourage the use of more players, which, gives them exposure to more stages and things like that. But I do think for smaller countries, it wouldn't make sense to impose like a rule on Luxembourg that they have to rotate their 11, because you know what, I just don't see the value in that. So I think it could work for, you know, maybe like the top 10 internationally ranked sides, or more. That's just an arbitrary number, but not all of them.
Yeah, very, very, very possibly that would be the way to work it out.
Yeah, no, I like the idea. I mean, I guess I'll bounce an idea back then, which is one that I was thinking of that might maybe be able to counter this idea of, you know, what is the point in having these qualifying games that are just going to be so one-sided, always teach us nothing, and it's just an real embarrassing kind of situation for both sides. I think England looked a little embarrassed when they scored their 5th. It's like, well, sorry. But what I would like to see is maybe some sort of tiered system that meant that clubs that are ranked high enough in the FIFA rankings internationally don't need to qualify in the same way. Instead, they can choose to have friendlies or to not play international games, and you know, players can either take a break from football, which would allow them to keep, you know, stay fit and healthy, or, you know, they could play the games, and they could rotate. It would be up to them. And then, you know, the lower teams in the rankings, like your Luxembourgs and your San Marinos, they have the opportunity to qualify instead.
Yeah, maybe something like that would just work, because it's just so not entertaining at the moment. And I think also, because when you have a big mismatch, like the magic of the FA Cup type things, what makes it so interesting and what makes it so, you know, valuable is that it's a rare occurrence. You're like, oh wow, this team in the Conference South is playing a team in the Premier League. You never would normally see that, but we see England playing San Marino, or Belgium playing Luxembourg, or Japan, who beat Mongolia 14-0 last night. You see that happen every single year, to the point where it's just like, it is just a bit sad.
Yeah, I mean, I would go so far as to say it's like every few months you see something like that, some sort of matchup like that. So yeah, I think basically qualifying needs to be ranked in a different way. It shouldn't be a pot system where, you know, you get tiers of countries in each group. It needs to be that the top countries aren't in that process. In the same way that, you know, the countries, those are the clubs in the Champions League that do well domestically don't need to qualify for the Champions League.
Yeah, well, it's funny you've mentioned both the Champions League and a reformatting of qualifying, because that will be our next segment, just after a little bit of useless trivia. And I've got one for you this week, which I was just looking at Aguero earlier when we were in that segment. We talked about his potential return to the Argentine League, and I was doing a little bit of research on some of the teams there. Obviously, he started Independiente, but there are a lot of big famous teams there. One of the most famous teams that listeners will probably be familiar with is Boca Juniors, who have a really interesting backstory as to what they look like today. They are a team from Argentina's capital, Buenos Aires, and they're named Boca Junior after the La Boca area of the city, which is host to the city's port. It means the mouth, because it's sort of like the mouth of two rivers meeting. In 1905, they were founded, and they played in blue and white stripes after the national colours. But in 1906, they played the hilariously named and similarly shirted Nottingham de Almagro to see which side would continue playing in that colour, a game which Boca Juniors then lost. As a result, the club didn't have their shirt colours, and so they decided that the way to figure out what colours they would adopt would be to stand in the port and adopt the colours of the flag of the first ship that sailed into port, which ended up being the Swedish ship Drottning Sofia. To this day, their club colours have been blue and yellow.
That is so funny. I never knew that was the reason that was why they wore blue and yellow. That's brilliant.
Yeah. It's quite an interesting way to pick your new colours. Also, I need to at some point find out more about Nottingham de Almagro.
I mean, what a name! What a name indeed. Yeah, I mean, I kind of like it as an idea. You know, it's fresh, it's exciting, it's vibrant. You could get anything, but it's also weird to think that we'll just pick another country and wear those colours.
Right?
Yeah, very off the wall.
Especially because they were like, we're going to replace our colours with the flag of the first ship to sail into port. They just changed from blue and white stripes, and they were in Argentina. Pretty strong chance it would have been another Argentinian ship.
That's true. I mean, presumably it was like anything that's not Argentina.
Yeah, the first ship to settle in was the Johnny Sophia. Actually, that was the 12th ship. It was the first one after the
That's
oxygen
11
tank.
rule. Straight from Buenos Aires. Yeah, I've got quite a fun one for you this week as well, which I came across, and I was just pleasantly enjoyed it. There's only one country that has had two cities with two teams reach the semi-finals or further of the European Cup / Champions League. So only one country has two cities with two teams within that city each reaching the semi-finals or beyond. And that
Wow.
I mean,
Wow.
I'll open it to the floor if you want to guess which country it is, or I'll just tell you.
Well, off the because I can think of a lot of places that have like a city with two, and then another city that has at least one. Like off the top of my head, I'm thinking like obviously Italy, both Inter Milan and AC Milan have played in the final, and then you've got Juventus, but I don't think Torino have ever been in the European Cup final. I could be wrong. And then I'm thinking of Real Madrid and Atletico Madrid, and then Barcelona. But have Espanyol ever been in the final? And then obviously, with England, take your pick from London, and then Everton, have they ever been in the European Cup final? I don't know.
No, they haven't. In fact, the only country is Scotland, who from Dundee FC in 1963 and Dundee United in 1984, and Glasgow with Celtic in 67, 70, 72 and 74, and Rangers in 1960.
What that is really, really interesting. Well, put that in your pipe and smoke it, all those people who bash the SPL.
There you go. A nice little one for you and your Scottish heritage, Cameron.
Yeah, fantastic. Moving into the Champions League and the report on it that came out this week. This is a story that was broken by Simon Stone of BBC Sport, and it's something we suspected that might be coming. It's something we talked about back in episode 32 when we talked about how FIFA were coming out and threatening players with bans from the World Cup if they joined the European Super League. And this is sort of a reformatting to how you qualify from the group stages and changing it to a Swiss model. So for those who didn't hear the episode where we talked about it at first, or who are new to this story entirely, I think we're just going to start by talking about what a Swiss model is. And this is a format of competition that football fans will be unfamiliar with because it's not quite round robin like the league format, and it's not quite group stages like the current setup. It's kind of like a mixture of the two. Teams will play a fixed amount of matches, 10 in this example, with 5 at home and 5 away, and they'll take place with each team's performance across those matches determining their subsequent opponent. So if you have a really good record, you'll play teams with better records and so forth. Ultimately, the top 8 seeded teams at the end of the round will then go into the round of 16, and the other 8 will be found from a playoffs that are held between the teams that finish between 9th and 24th. So it's already off the rip super, super complicated. There's algorithms in place. You've got 2 different modes of getting into the round of 16, including a playoff round. There's going to be way more matches. Once it gets to the round of 16 level, it then does function the same as the Champions League, but it means 10 sort of quote-unquote group stage matches instead of 6. Instead of playing 3 different opponents twice each, you play 10 different opponents once each. And there are going to be 225 Champions League games per campaign instead of the current 125.
Yeah, so the immediate thing there is just a dramatic increase in the number of games that they will be playing, and the fact that there are 4 more teams in the running now, from up to 36 from 32, which was the 8 groups of 4, which it currently has as its system. It's an interesting one because I almost feel like all of this detail has made it quite hard to work out whether or not I think this would be a good thing. For example, been trying to work out whether or not I think it would encourage smaller teams to go further or it would make it harder for those teams to go further. Personally, my instinct is always that the more games you have to play, the fewer upsets there are, but I could see it really going either way. There are some criticisms that have already been lodged for these new changes. I think 10 FAs have already written to protest. They've kind of cited things like scheduling issues, having all of these extra games in already like really complicated and tight fitting calendars for each season would be really hard. The way that these extra 4 teams would be introduced, I think we could maybe talk about in a little bit. It's complicated again, but it isn't necessarily the healthiest way that it would be done. suggestions that more games will lead to more income, which is great for these clubs that are competing, has an opposing side, which is that more income they can make from Champions League distorts their domestic competition. So that could arguably lead to the death of more domestic competition. I think there's really a lot to unwrap.
Definitely, those are all the headlines. I think a good place to start when we're sort of unraveling that is we now know what a Swiss model is. We've got to sort of look at why it's being brought in, and why is this change happening? The reason it's happening when it is happening, which is supposedly 2024, is because the broadcast and sponsorship deals for the Champions League end in that year, and the new UEFA president, Alexander Seferin, is sort of the one who's had this as a brainchild. What's daunting about the whole Swiss system is not even necessarily this fact that it's increased from 32 to 36, which is already, as you've mentioned, something that a lot of FAs are very concerned about, and definitely the scheduling change is really a concern as well. What's really concerning about it is the potential that the Swiss system has to expand. It's most often used in tournaments of sports like chess, where you can often have like thousands of participants turn up on the same first day to see who makes top cut. And so the Swiss model allows for you to have thousands and thousands of competitors all format in the same thing. I don't think the Champions League's ever about to go to 1,000 competitors, but it does definitely work and fall in line with the sort of idea that we've had about UEFA trying to sort of make their own European Super League, basically, instead of the one that the clubs want to break away and create. It could be the case that we eventually see more and more and more teams added until we have like a 60-team, Champions League, which would be absolutely insane, especially due to the sort of the scheduling concerns. Also, because of the games being played so long, because there are so many games, it means it's going to be played all season long. So teams are not going to have these breaks that we normally have in European competition in mid-December and mid-February. They're going to be playing from the start of the season all the way to the end. And this is also having problems with the cup competitions, but we'll get into that in a second. The extra 4 places being allocated is really interesting. If you want to go into that really quickly.
Yeah, sure. So it's a tricky one to wrap your head around, so I'll try to explain it concisely. But effectively, one of these places would go to the country with the 5th highest UEFA coefficient, which is currently France, because they trail behind the top 4 in terms of the amount of places that they get allocated in their league. So, for example, in the English system, the top 4 go through. In France, it's fewer, so they would get an extra league position, and then the other 3 would go to kind of historic clubs, so clubs which have the best coefficient in the Champions League, the best history in not just the Champions League but also the European League, Europa League, all European competitions. They would it would go to them if they had been unable to qualify for the Champions League that season, but they had qualified for Europe. So say, for example, Manchester United, who have a great history in the Champions League, if they finished 5th or 6th that one year, qualified for the Europa League, they would potentially be eligible to play in the Champions League instead, because they might have one of the best historical records in Europe.
Yeah, I think it goes even beyond that, actually. I think, obviously, there are a few things that haven't been confirmed. It still needs to be ratified by the various FAs. But the 3 spaces, I've heard that... So there's 4 in total. The one that's going to France, I don't think anyone really has a problem with. But of those 3 spaces, they're still figuring out exactly what the format is. I've heard that 2 of them would be wildcards based on, as you mentioned there, the UEFA coefficient, and could mean that even if you finish well outside the European positions, you could still qualify. So, for example, a team like Liverpool this season, who may well finish outside the top 6, would still qualify for the Champions League ahead of like a West Ham or someone because of their recent performances in the European competitions, which I think a lot of people have sort of been talking about as blatantly unfair. It's very, very top heavy. It's also worth noting, actually, something I forgot to mention earlier. The system that we talked about with the Swiss system, the top 8 teams that qualified from that Swiss round they would not only go through the round of 16, but they would automatically qualify for next season's Champions League as well, which is normally something that only happens if you win the Champions League or the Europa League. And so this whole system is becoming like a real gated community. It's making it a lot easier for the teams that have been in the Champions League before to remain in the Champions League, and it's making it a lot more difficult for teams outside of it to enter. Now, it's obvious why UEFA are doing this. They're trying to appease the big clubs that are leading the charge for this European Super League, but at the same time, it's a real slap in the face to these clubs that are trying to come up and that aren't. And it really it makes you think about, we look at teams like Leicester City, for example, or Man City even, a couple of years ago, these teams who sort of rise up from not obscurity so much, but they get a big investment because someone has thought, I'll take this team to greatness. If suddenly we have this situation where even if you have loads of money thrown in, sorry, you didn't play in the Champions League last season, so you can't play in it next season, short of winning the league, we're going to see less of these teams popping up and less new forces coming through, which, again, I think serves the wills of the big clubs. But I think it's just such a massive smack in the face to the quote-unquote smaller clubs.
Yeah, definitely. And it's tricky because there's this body called the European Leagues Commission, which are kind of the ones trying to fight against this, along with a number of national FAs. But despite the fact that they are in charge of, I think, 37 different professional leagues across Europe, they also have literally zero power over UEFA to influence them. All they can do is try and be public about it and push their agenda. So yeah, it's incredibly hard to work out what influence they have, whether or not these things will go through. It's incredibly frustrating from my perspective because I'm really against this European Super League. I know you are as well, as we talked about. But it's kind of finding this balance between trying to appeal to these clubs that want these securities, that want essentially anti-competition laws put in place, while also trying to make it more competitive and fairer at the same time. Realistically, it's probably going to be impossible to do that.
Well, I mean, sort of, except for, up to this point, the sort of system we had in place where FIFA were having to sort of show the gun they were holding under the table and go play it or we'll kick you out of the World Cup was a bit of an odd deterrent, but I would say it was probably an effective one.
True. I mean, I don't know. What do you make of all these plans? How do you see the Swiss model developing in the next few years?
It really concerns me because I think, again, it's a move towards, making the rich clubs richer and helping the big clubs grow and helping them, keep... It's definitely a thing that favours, like, for example, a team like Liverpool this season who would have not really earned the right to play in next season's Champions League, but due to their history and due to their past season, they're being judged on past merits, basically, or an Arsenal, if you like, or a Spurs, or teams like that would qualify ahead of teams that might be being really plucky and working towards it and have earned their spot in European competition. So it seems really, really unfair to me. I think that on top of that, you have the fact that it's sort of a double whammy for these smaller clubs. We talk about, these Premier League clubs or these La Liga clubs or these Serie A clubs that are sort of finishing in the top four and not getting in there. That's one sort of area of less big clubs that are getting affected. It's also going to affect both those clubs and clubs lower down in the scheduling changes. Now, because the Champions League is going to be 225 games, it's going to need more spaces to play, and that's going to be taking up the midweek role that is usually dedicated to the FA Cup and the EFL Cup or their variants across the world. We've already had a lot of people come out. For example, Crystal Palace's chairman, Steve Parridge, has said that this system would have a devastating effect on the English game. Rick Parry, who's the chairman of the EFL, has come out and said that if they stripped away the English Football League Cup, or the Carabao Cup as it's now known, which is a very real possibility if this Champions League schedule goes forward, it'll strip away a third of the revenue of the Football League and be a threat to the existence of certain clubs. So it's basically a system that is taking a club like Man City or Manchester United or Liverpool or any of the sort of quote-unquote big six clubs or Real Madrid and going, hey, do you guys want more money? Where are we going to be getting this money from, you ask? Well, we're just going to steamroll Burnley. And it just seems really, really imbalanced. Again, on top of that, it might even be a triple whammy because, as you mentioned, with more and more money going into the continental game, there's going to be less money from media outlets and broadcasting rights going to the domestic game, especially if things like the EFL Cup, even if it's not cancelled in the FA Cup, if teams start just viewing it as like a youth competition, there's going to be no broadcast money going into those competitions because it'll be being funneled into this, reformatted Champions League. So all these teams are going to be drained from every single possible orifice so that the Manchester Uniteds and the Real Madrids can get a bigger payday. I think it's absolutely disgraceful.
Agreed. And yeah, I think I think all of your points are good. I think even if you were to take out the big teams that were going to be competing in the Champions League that year from competitions like the EFL Cup, that would still remove some of the attractions, some of the TV rights and the sponsorship and the money that would be involved in that competition. I mean, personally, I would love to see, with this opportunity for getting more clubs in, up to 36, I would love to see something like each country that wins, the club that from the country that wins. So, for example, if Liverpool wins the Champions League, an extra team from England gets to compete in the Champions League. I think that would be really fun. The other thing that I would, because then also I think you get a lot more national pride. I think you get a lot more English supporters supporting English sides to win, and the same in Spain and Germany and Italy. And then the other thing that I would love to see happen is for some sort of domestic agreement, if it couldn't happen across Europe, but whereby a portion of the winnings were distributed back to the FA rather than to the winning club. And then that could either be distributed across the league to help make it fairer and more competitive, or down into the lower leagues as well to help support them.
Yeah, I think both of those are really great ideas, because it sort of takes more of the competition funds to helping the teams that actually need it. Obviously, we talk about the teams in the big leagues, but also there's been a lot of complaints from FAs of countries like Scotland, for example, or the slightly less well-known leagues that still have to play a qualifying round, that these wildcard positions are not going to their leagues, but are instead going to, be a safety net for the Liverpools and the... I keep saying Liverpool just because it's them this season, but it could have been Man United anytime this season, could have been Arsenal anytime after 2014. But those teams that haven't earned the right are getting a safety net instead of, say, for example, the second best team in Scotland or the best team in Belgium.
Yeah, it's tricky because we've seen quite a lot recently clubs fall in and out of the top four, and that does significantly affect them because, as we've talked about in the past, it really detracts from the attraction of players joining that club. So it's harder to get the big players that you would need to try and overhaul the side in order to get back into the top four. But I really like the ebb and flow. I think it's really good for just keeping things fresh. I think it's really good to have rotation. I think it also demands tactical flexibility and people continuing to create new systems and new models and new ways to use players to kind of keep improving and getting back to their best, even if they don't have the consistent crutch of making the most money in the domestic league. So yeah, I'm fully against it.
Well, that's the other thing that's interesting that you may have been about to make this point, but you sort of brushed on it, and in my mind anyway, is that if you have a situation whereby league position for some teams is inconsequential relative to Champions League qualification, especially combined with the fact that the top 8 teams will qualify, will we see that really impact domestic competition? When you have teams like Manchester United this season, for example, who get to the back end of the season, realise probably not going to win the league, and they're just going to down tools, like when you see like a Palace or a Newcastle and they're like 14th place, and they're like, we're not going to go down, we can just relax now. Are we just going to see that from every team that's not first when they get to the end of the league? Because they're like, well, we've qualified for the Champions League, there's no push for the top 4 because that doesn't mean anything.
I mean, you hope not, but it's a realistic possibility. Yeah, all of these are realistic concerns. I think that it would just completely destroy the really finely tuned balance that we currently have. And I don't think that balance is necessarily a good balance. It's not healthy. Changes need to be made, but it's a lot better than what this proposes.
Yeah, changes in the other direction to this one.
Yeah, exactly. So, it's tough because I always feel like a component of this is to make it complicated enough that people can't complain. But yeah, I don't see any redeeming feature in this Swiss model, apart from the fact that I do like the idea of, each team playing 9 other teams, and that being some sort of league. Like, I actually do really like that idea, but I don't think it's worth all of the stuff that comes with it.
Yeah, I agree. I think it would be definitely interesting to sort of see it. Well, you wouldn't see the schedule initially because it's algorithm defined, but it would be interesting to play 10 different teams instead of 3 home and away. But to what end? I don't know. I'm not sure so much about it. It'll be interesting to see what happens. It was initially reported that it was going to be happening tomorrow, I think it was, but it's been pushed back so that finishing touches can be done. And the amendment, the sort of proposal is going to be rubber stamped or not rubber stamped on April the 19th. So just a few weeks away from this. It could really turn the sport on its head, and I think for the worse.
Yeah, agreed. So more to follow in the coming weeks, but be warned, listeners. Shall we resolve our guessing game?
Let's indeed. Could you give the clues to the listeners again?
Yeah, sure thing. So I actually have 5 clues in total here. 3 of them which I gave earlier and I'll give again. If you're not sure you have any ideas, I'll give you another one. And then if you guess and get it wrong, I'll give you the 5th.
Okay.
So the first clue is that he was the youngest player ever to make 100 appearances in the Champions League when he reached the milestone.
Mm-hmm.
He has been on the front cover of a Pro Evolution Soccer game, and he was the first ever winner of the FIFA Ballon d'Or. And the final clue is, his first ever contract was written on a paper napkin, and when he was coming up in youth football, his country actually organised 2 extra under-20 friendlies just to cement his status as their national player.
Okay, so off the rip, I got to tell you, I don't know who this is, but I can make an informed guess, which I suppose is the the raison d'etre of guessing game. But rather than sort of having figured it out, I'm just going to have to look at it.
Okay, sure thing. Well, youngest... I'll give you the extra 4th clue then.
Well, yeah, sure, why not?
So his ethnic heritage is Italian. His first language is Spanish, but he plays for neither country.
Okay. I maybe know who this is. You've thrown me a lot of really good clues because they've sent me one way in the first half of them and then the other way entirely. But I'll walk you through my process. The youngest player to mark 100 goals in Champions League.
100 appearances.
100 appearances. To me, I mean, obviously that has to be someone who's played for a top club that's consistently been in the Champions League and someone who's playing them for them from a really young age, or a couple of clubs. So it has to be someone like, for example, a Cristiano Ronaldo who was playing for a really, really young age, or Wayne Rooney or someone playing for like a Man United team from a really, really young age. And then the fact that they've been on the front cover of a PES game doesn't massively help me. There's been quite a few players. The first ever winner of the FIFA Ballon d'Or is interesting. You've qualified as the FIFA Ballon d'Or. And the napkin contract doesn't help me either. Based on the youngest player to mark 100 in Champions League, I'm just thinking that it is going to be Lionel Messi, because he started playing at Barcelona so young, and Barcelona have just been a fixture in the Champions League for basically ever. So yeah, that's going to be my guess. Lionel Messi.
It is, in fact, Lionel Messi. Congratulations, Cameron. Well done.
a shot in the absolute pitch black darkness, and I managed to hit the target.
Yeah, no, a great guess. The clue that would have been kind of an instant giveaway if you picked up on it was, you kind of picked up on it, the FIFA Ballon d'Or. So for those of you who don't know, the Ballon d'Or as a competition has been running since 1956, but for 5 years between 2010 and 2015, it merged with the FIFA International Player of the Year to form the FIFA Ballon d'Or. So the first year it was given away was 2010, the final year was 2015. So that was going to be the clue that, if you picked up on it, it was going to probably win it for you straight up. But I wondered if...
Messi won like four of the 5 of those, didn't he?
Yeah, something like that. But it was going to be tricky because, ironically, the Champions League starts in like the 55-56 season and the Ballon d'Or the year after, or that year. So it was definitely encouraging you to maybe think of like an older player.
Fortunately, my knowledge of older players that started playing in European competition when they were like 16 is not that good. So my own obsolete knowledge set helped me out.
Nice. Yeah. The extra clue I was going to give was that here his initials are LLAM. His first name is Luis, but he doesn't go by it.
Yeah, I mean, so he speaks Spanish and has a different heritage and I didn't know he had Italian ancestry at all. So
yeah, it's actually I think it's quite common in Argentina. They have quite a strong Italian second or third generation contingent. I mean, the main thing for me, I did not know his name was Luis. It's not even on his Wikipedia page, and I wondered if that was going to throw you or if it was going to be too obvious a clue.
Lionel Messi. Great one. You really threw me for a loop.
I was really hoping I'd be able to. Yeah, I was really hoping I'd be able to sneak that one past you. But well done.
Well, I think that's all we have time for this week. Rupert, great to talk to you as always.
Cam, thank you very much for listening. We will be making our predictions for the weekend to come, and we will be talking about them next week. And until then, Cam, it's been great talking to you, and thank you to everyone for listening.
Cheers, guys. Bye.